Okay, get this. Have you ever stopped to think that the microchip powering your phone and a philosophical blueprint from thousands of years ago might actually be talking about the exact same thing? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to dive into, how some really ancient wisdom gives us a perfect map for our most modern tech. It sounds a little nuts, right? A tiny piece of silicon engineered with insane precision and the wild, massive, unpredictable sea. But what if I told you they shared the exact same fundamental structure? Seriously, stick with me, and by the end of this, you're going to see it too. So, to really get this connection, we have to start at the very beginning. We need to look at the raw material of our entire digital age, the one element that is the literal foundation of every single piece of modern electronics you own. You know, every microchip starts its life as this perfectly pure, totally uniform slab. Usually, it's a wafer of either silicon or germanium. And this isn't just step one. It's the one constant in the whole process. It's the unchanging canvas where all that digital complexity is about to be painted. So, how in the world do we get from that blank canvas to a processing powerhouse? Well, it happens in three basic stages. First, you've got the substratum, that pure silicon. Then you strategically add specific impurities. This is what creates all the functional bits and pieces, the transistors, the resistors, the capacitors. And finally, you assemble all those parts into the final product, the manifestation, a working CPU. So you've got a base, components, and a final product. Remember that three-part structure. It's the key to everything. And here's where it gets really interesting. That exact same three-layer pattern, substratum, components, and manifestation, was actually described centuries and centuries ago in Vedantic philosophy as a blueprint for, well, all of reality itself. This ancient framework is called the Vedantic triad, and the idea is pretty profound. It says that everything we experience, literally everything that exists, is made up of three distinct but completely interconnected layers. Okay, so the first and most fundamental layer is called adhisthana. Think of this as the substratum, the ultimate source. It's the pure, unchanging reality that everything else is built on. Sound familiar? This is a perfect parallel to our pure wafer of germanium or silicon. Now, built on top of that substratum is ashraya. These are the supporting structures, the different forms that pop up, and they depend entirely on the adhisthana to even exist. In our tech analogy, this is all those millions of transistors and resistors that get etched onto the silicon. And finally, we have Vishwa. This is the whole shebang, the total manifestation, the final thing that we see and interact with. For us, of course, this is the fully assembled, ready-to-go CPU. So you see, it's a direct, one-to-one mapping. Adhisthana is the silicon wafer. Ashraya are the individual components. And Vishwa is the final CPU. An ancient philosophical blueprint perfectly describes a modern microchip. And it turns out, once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. This pattern goes way beyond just technology. Let's go back to that ocean analogy. The waves that we see, that's the Vishwa, the final manifestation. They're supported by the entire body of the ocean. That's the Ashraya. But what's the fundamental, unchanging substratum of it all? The Adhisthana? It's just water. Simple. Same thing with a wooden table. The table is the Vishwa, the wood itself is the Ashraya, and the earth that the tree grew from, well, that's the Adhisthana. And this really gets to the heart of the whole idea. The final thing never stops being its original source material. The CPU, with all its mind-boggling complexity, is still fundamentally germanium. The waves are still water. The table is still, in essence, earth. The manifestation is just a temporary form that the substratum takes on. But this framework doesn't just describe the structure of things, how they're put together. It also describes their entire life cycle, this dynamic process of coming into being, existing for a while, and then passing away. Let's look at our CPU again. Its life follows this pattern perfectly. It begins with srishti, or creation, when the chip is manufactured in a factory. Then it enters sthiti, its time of just being, of functioning, while it runs our devices. And finally, it reaches its end through decay, when it becomes obsolete and eventually gets broken down into its basic parts again. And of course, this same cycle is totally universal. A wave is created, it holds its form as it travels across the ocean, and then it decays when it breaks on the shore. A table is created, it's used for years, and eventually it decays. It is the exact same pattern, governing pretty much everything we can see. So, now that we've seen this pattern in our technology, out in nature, and even in everyday objects, what is the one big idea we should really walk away with from all of this? It's this: everything we see, everything we interact with, the Vishwa, is really just a temporary name and a temporary form given to an unchanging underlying reality, the Adhisthana. The CPU is just silicon arranged in a really complex way. The wave is just water in a temporary shape. Which, brings us to one final, much more personal question. If this blueprint applies to everything from a microchip to the ocean, what is the unchanging substratum, the Adhisthana, that underlies the constant flow of your own thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me.